arduous road. It was meticulous at times. It was very intentional at times. It was rogue at times. It was wild at times because it was 2017. Clinical trials were a little bit more, how can I say, open. And what I mean by that, I feel like they're more compartmentalized now. This trial that saved my life wasn't necessarily targeted towards triple negative breast cancer. We were invited to the party as part of a cohort. So all you had to do was have a solid tumor, but you just have to understand the exclusionary criteria to get into that. And all of that information I learned on my own and by just talking to different researchers, reading white papers, really doing the homework 10 and 12 hours a day, because at the time I was, given a stage 4 diagnosis in 2017, and there was no FDA-approved drug outside of chemo for triple negative. It was chemotherapy, radiation, and that was it. And so the window of opportunity for me to stay alive was really, really small at the time. And then I started, sneaking my way past security guards, rolling up into labs, having conversations with researchers who were very open. They didn't call the police. They sat me down and they had conversations and they educated me about what I needed to do to make an informed decision. I got genomic testing. I sent all that information to, a researcher who was doing, clinical trials on a particular mutation that I didn't have, but I had a cousin to it. And I was like, it starts with a P. I think I should be part of your trial. And he was like, that's not how clinical trials, that's not how science works, Karen. But I have something coming down the pipeline. Would you be interested? I was the first person in the nation with triple negative on the trial. There were 35 of us. There were 5 responders. And to this day, I am one of the only complete responders on that trial. The window of opportunity was very small. And it was a miraculous, recovery. Literally, I was given a 4% chance of survival, and here I am.
Even before my first chemo, my doctor said, now this was 2012, we highly suggest you get genetic testing. Genomic testing was still very costly. It was there, very costly, but genetic testing. And when I did, I didn't even know why I was doing it, but I figured they know how to fight cancer. I don't, let me give them all the tools. So we did that genetic testing, and it wasn't until 2 years later, after 2 years of chemo, and I got into this clinical trial. I didn't even know why I was in the clinical trial, but I knew the chemo wasn't working. So after my first dose, it was pretty miraculous, and we'll get into that later, but after the first dose of the clinical trial, I went to visit my oncologist, and it shrank the tumor more than over 2 years of chemo had done. It was amazing. And it was the first time I was not in pain. And the nurses said,
that was after the first dose?
After the first dose.
That's amazing.
And my doctor said, we're looking for more people like you. And the nurses saw I was kind of confused. I was like looking around, and I thought, what, 5 foot something? And they go, MSI high.
I understand.
And it was at that point that I knew what I did 2 years ago was absolutely the most important thing I did, like your genomic testing. It got me into the trial. I didn't even know that until that point, and that's how important that genetic testing was. Now, Brandon, you also had genetic testing as well as a part of your journey.
Yeah, mine was back in 2011, and this was before really anything was, there was no path. It was kind of like, this is where you're at, and let's see what the options are. And, I was lucky enough, I bounced around a few hospitals in New York and ended up getting up at Yale, and Dr. Schnoll had a spot in a trial that was an outpatient trial, and he had a contact down at NIH and NCI in Bethesda, and I was able to get into that trial, which was then inpatient. So when I went down, I was on interleukin-2 first, before I then came back up to New York after that, and then I was back on, or I started on nivolumab. So this was all then outpatient. So I did some inpatient, I did some outpatient, but when we talked about what were the questions, and I'm still one of the first to be able to be on those trials. So they didn't know. It wasn't like, hey, this is what you're gonna do, this is how it's gonna feel, this is what's gonna be next, here's your timeline. I was kind of helping them figure out the timeline, And being able to be part of those 2 clinical trials was something that I didn't even know. I mean, when I first found out and they said I had stage 4, I remember asking the doctor, now I'm 27. I don't really, you think you know a lot, you don't really know anything. And I remember asking him, I said, how many stages are there? And he's like, 4. I said, oh. And then he's like, and when we say metastatic, that means that it's left the original area, now is in a second area, which was, so it started up here on my left side and ended up in my right bone. He goes, that's because, so I'm like, oh, so this is really bad. Like, I just didn't know. So like, when I talk about like what kind of questions you had, I had kind of all of them because I didn't even know where I was even starting.